city, I've been browsing. Treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel, yeah. It's only real in my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 241 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. We got a fun show planned for you today. We started to move out of rookie drafts. 95% of you guys are done with those. We're going to start the 2024 season, which means it's the perfect time to start talking about the rebuild process. Some of you guys are all in Smash contenders, and Snoog and I have showed you guys how to do that. Some of you guys are doing a retool. Today, we're going to talk rebuild, because if you start now, you start the process as soon as possible, you can really get yourself ahead of the game, because people are going to want to start buying players that are going to be scoring them points in the next, couple of months as we move forward. So without further ado, my man Snoog, how you doing today?
Doing good, Dad, and I'm excited, man. It's time. It's time to start buying those 25 first. It's time to start addressing rosters, seeing where your team lands, if it's kind of in that contention realm or if it's more of a rebuild. Don't get stuck in the middle. That's what keeps you in 6th place, 7th place, 8th place. First or last, baby. We know how to do it. You're either the 101 or you're winning championship. So we'll help you kind of steer your way to be that guy.
And that's the thing. We really preach it at Smash Acceptance. It's top 3 or bottom 3. If you're top 3, you're getting paid. If you're bottom 3, you're getting a stud. I mean, this year it would have been Neighbors, Harrison, or Caleb Williams. And next year there's going to be 3 other guys towards the top, probably Burden, one of the quarterbacks, and Gordon. You know what I mean? You're going to always, if you're in that top 3, bottom 3, you're always going to put yourself in a position where you're able to really turn that rebuild around a little bit quicker, or you're able to make money when you're in a Smash contender. Before we go too far into this, I really want to let you guys know we are going to do a live stream tonight with our Scott Fishbowl giveaway. So if you guys have not done that, all you need to do is go to our YouTube page, subscribe to the YouTube page. Snoog and I both have a pinned tweet right now that all you got to do is just put a copy of your subscription in there, and we're going to give away a golden ticket. So really excited to do that. Really excited that, Scott and Ryan gave us an opportunity at Smash Accept to give away one of those golden tickets. We've done it every single year. Guys love that, because they get to be involved in the scenario. So Snoog, let's talk about it. So step one in the, this was a process that I came up with about 5 years ago now. It has a 95% hit rate over the guys that I've talked to, guys that I've helped in the Patreon, myself included, within 2 years to get to the playoffs. Every single one I've done, within 2 years, I've been in the championship, because this is a process that's, tried and true. A lot of analysts out there say, hey, rebuilding is not a thing. You should just gradually start building. For me, it's like, we only want to be top 3 or bottom 3. I never want to sit there. My first couple years in Dynasty, I was like 5th, 6th, 7th, and it's like no one wants to be in those areas where your rookie picks just get into a muddled area that you don't want. So step one, and this is the most important process, and the process that Snoog and I help people with in the Patreon the most, is assess your roster. So Snoog, when it comes to roster assessment, and you and I are both hovering around 20 leagues, how do you go through in your leagues and say, you know what, this team is ready for a rebuild, this team is ready, to move all in? I know you and I are doing this every single week, where you're like, okay, let's see what's going on with this roster. Let's start making some moves. So how do you assess those rosters to say, you know what, this is time for a rebuild?
Yeah. The first step I always do is I go through my rosters. I look for superstars. If I don't have those, I know exactly right then and there that I'm not a contender. If I don't have elite quarterbacks, elite wide receivers, a loaded running back room, like if you just have those players like Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, like you're not winning a championship with those
you're going to be
players.
That fringe playoffs.
You're going to be
5, 6.
7th or 6th.
Yep.
But if you have AJ Brown, you have Devontae Adams, you have guys like that you know are going to finish top 5. You got a loaded running back room. You got like a Breece Hall, anchor RB1, and then you got like Joe Mixon, Kamara, all these guys. Or you got like a Christian McCaffrey on your team. Then it's like, okay, I have a chance to be a true contender. But you're not, and I will say this 10 times out of 10, if you're stuck in the middle of the pack with all those fringe wide receiver 1s or like those high-end wide receiver 2s or 3s, like your Pittmans, your DJ Moores, even going back into like the JSNs, the Jordan Addisons, like I get so many people DMing me these rosters, and it's like Jordan Addison, Deontay Johnson, Michael Pittman. Their quarterbacks is like Brock Purdy and like Tua.
And that's
It's like, come
that's
on.
why we've been preaching foundational wide receivers.
Yeah.
My team in Smash 2, it's got Jefferson, AJ Brown, Jamar Chase, and Puka Nakua. And then my running backs, we fill in. It's James Conner, Raheem Mostert, Aaron
Yep.
Jones. And because when you get to the playoffs, let's be honest, Jordan Addison's not winning you a championship. But if you have to plug and play Zeke, or you plug and play one of those guys that, has a juicy playoff matchup that's won us leagues in the past where you get, just your Samaje Perine pops off for a week or two because he gets an opportunity. That doesn't happen at the wide receiver. So you want to
Yeah.
be foundational there. For me, and you hit it, and I'm going to talk about it in a different way. My first thing I consider is the core player ages, right? So if I have elite level wide receivers, but we're talking Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, okay, those are guys that are core age there. We talk about foundational wide receivers, right? And that's why everybody was like, Dad, what do you mean by that? When I want a foundational wide receiver, he's 25 and under because a proper rebuild takes 2 years. So if I have, let's say, a guy that's 27 years old, we'll take Michael Pittman, and he's what I would say foundational. 2 years from now, when I'm ready to smash, he's 29. Right? But Malik Neighbors 2 years from now when I'm ready to smash is 23, 24. Now I'm in an area where I have a dominant window. And that's the key to it all, right? When you rebuild, you put yourself in a dominant window for 3 to 5 years, and you want to just keep retooling after you do that. But to get yourself into that area, you want core players. You want to make sure you have future draft capital. So people send me rosters all the time. Dad, what do you think of this? You don't have a single 25 or 26 pick? It's scary as hell, right? Like you're 1 injury away, 2 injuries away from just you gave away Caleb Williams last year, and I've seen it time and time again where people are like, you know what? I traded my 25 first for player X and player X got hurt. And now guess what? You wasted that pick. Now all of a sudden you gave away Caleb Williams for Terry McLaurin. Like you made an asset move that is going to absolutely destroy you. And I'm not worried about thirds and fourths. But you got to have your 25 first. You got to have your 26 first, maybe a second, but you got to make sure you're in that area. And number 3, what you said, I want to look at my max points for with elite assets, right? I want to make sure I am towards the top of the team league in scoring, but I don't want to have those guys be aged out. I want them elite assets. Like you said, your Justin Jeffersons, your Garrett Wilsons, your Marvin Harrison, your Malik Neighbors. So the first roster I want to talk about, and you might say, Dad, this is a pretty good roster, right? This is a roster that I started to rebuild last year. I came in 3rd place, so I got my money back. And then I looked at the roster, and Snoog, my quarterbacks were Jalen Hurts and Matthew Stafford. Pretty solid. My running backs, Derrick Henry and Kareem Hunt. Now, this would have been last year before the season started. I'm like, okay. Wide receivers, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuels, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen, Tyler Boyd, tight end Cole Kmet. Right there. That team there is going to finish 5th or 6th, period, right? If I get an injury or 2 away, that team's not going to make the playoffs. So I started the rebuild. I'm like, all right, I'm going to tear this thing down. This team right now in what would have been 2023, I'm like, I could finish fringe playoffs, but by 2024, I'm done. I have 0 chance, right? Because these guys here that are on that roster, we're talking about Hopkins lost value. Keenan lost value. Boyd's disappeared. You know what I mean? Debo's lost some value. Kupp's lost value. Derrick Henry has moved up a little bit because of his scenario. Jalen Hurts has even lost a little bit. So the most important asset you want to get is you want to start building around those young foundational pieces. So the next thing, Snoog, step 2, and ultimately the most important step in the process is make sure you have your first. If you do a rebuild and all these people say, you know what, I traded my first for Terry McLaurin last year and now all of a sudden I don't have my first, get it back. You need to do it at the proper timing. Like you can't just say, hey, everybody, I'm rebuilding. Somebody give me my first back. You need to make a move. So in this particular league, I traded Joe Mixon and a second for my first. I looked like a playoff team, right? But I give up Mixon in a second. Now I get my first. So that Mixon in a second turned into Caleb Williams because nobody was thinking, you know what? Dad's going to just tear it up because it was a solid team, but the age was up there, And I think getting your first, we've talked about it before in the past. Zoltan and I have done research on it. It is worth 30 to 50% more than the 102. This year was a little bit tighter. Marvin Harrison was pretty close to Caleb Williams, but historically speaking, it's worth 30% more. And I think next year, we don't know if it's shed for Shador, all out for Ollie, blow it for Burden. Like we don't know what that's going to be. But someone's going to separate themselves and make that 101 worth so much more.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that too with your rebuild because I just had a team. It was a $200 startup with a lot of sharp analysts. Zoltan's in it. Popes is in it. Ivy Man's in it. The captain, who's in 50+ leagues, like a lot of really good. This is the one that you were actually going to join, but you ended up not being able to do it like towards
I
the
got kids to
end.
feed.
Yeah, I left the startup with maybe like 4 players that were worth anything. I had like 24 firsts. I had drafted Kyler Murray and like I think it was like round 2. He was like that was like when he was injured. I got him like I could tell you right now where I got him. I got him
He
at
was
the
going
205.
third.
I took him
Yeah.
205 because I was like, I'm not letting him drop. I took Zay Flowers in like round 7 or 8. I missed on Quentin Johnson on this team, and then I drafted Kendre Miller in like round 10. Those were the players I left my draft with.
Mhm.
Right now, this team is Kyler Murray, Tyreek Hill, Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brock Bowers, Roma Dunze, Dak Prescott, Caleb Williams, Lad McConkey, and I have 425 firsts. And this is a league with a lot of people that know damn well as much as me, if not more. So it's all about process and timing.
Timing's
You
key.
could be in the best league ever with the smartest people you know. But if you're trading, if people don't know your strategy and what you're planning on doing and you're ahead of the curve and you're in that startup or you have a loaded team and you could be a team that's like, oh,
Mhm.
this kid could win the championship, and you slowly start pawning off pieces. I had 4 trades done before I accepted one. And that's how I was doing it. I was
Yeah.
getting these trades done. And now I ended up with like 101, 102, 103, and like 105 in that class, like for the top end
Yeah.
first. And I bought Tyreek Hill. I bought Drake London.
And
Like
that's why I
I
tell
bought
everybody,
Dak Prescott. I had like early second round picks. I literally just pawned off a bunch of draft capital and started building out this roster. And then the next thing that I like to highlight is key depth. That's a good way to see if you're a contender. If your bench is just junk and you could drop every single player on that bench, you got to make some type of
Mhm.
move to start getting your Zekes, your Aaron Jones, your James Connors, those cheap guys that you don't even have to pay a second for.
Yeah, and that's why in startups I always tell people like, you know what? Take Devonte Adams instead of a guy that you're gonna bet on and hope their upside pans out. Because when the draft's over, like in Smash 13, I ended up trading 4 more assets. I got 5 in the startup, traded 4 assets, and got myself more 25 first. In the
Yep.
25 class, Snoog, what everybody's saying is they don't have another Caleb Williams. That's true, but the safest asset in Dynasty, the best asset is always liquid assets of picks. Picks do not drop in value. There is this real world scenario where Brian Thomas Jr. blows up, but there's a real world scenario where he loses value. There's things there, but that 25-101 is not going to lose value. It would only continue to grow value. The 102, all your firsts. That's why we really talk about trying to get liquid with your assets, making sure you get that 101, get yourself in this position to absolutely smash. Because when you have the 101, Snook, you have so many options. Like in this particular draft, I did take Caleb Williams. No one wanted to trade in. But another one, I traded Caleb Williams for the 103, the 108, and the 201. Traded the 201 for a first, ended up getting Malik Neighbors, JJ McCarthy at 25 first for Caleb Williams, and you insulate them. When you're doing a rebuild, you want to insulate and you want to liquidate. You want to get as many shots. You want to get as many lottery tickets as you can while you're building up towards those elite assets and starting to move off those other ones. So that's our step 1 and 2. Step 3 is the biggest one, where I created this several years ago and everybody's like, I don't understand it. So step 3 for me is the splash trade. So most people, they say they want to do a rebuild, right? And they'll go and they'll make 1 or 2 trades, and then they get themselves in a position where you're like, oh man, I have 2 firsts and I only need like 3 assets to complete my starting lineup. So I'm going to trade 2 firsts for Derrick Henry, Debo Samuel, and Nick Chubb. And then all 3 of them don't pan out. And now all of a sudden you just went from starting to rebuild and build to the future to dead again. So you got to do it again. The splash trade for me is that trade where you're like, I'm no longer in the fence, bro. I'm not sitting there. I'm all in. We talk about our contenders, Snoog. You and I want to go all in. If I'm rebuilding, I'm going all the way. I'm not trying to be like, you know what? If I do this and I tinker here a little bit, that's the difference between rebuild and retool. Retool is your number 1 asset's Christian McCaffrey, but the rest of your team's solid. Then you trade Christian McCaffrey for Saquon in a first. So you trade Christian McCaffrey and your 4th quarterback for a QB upgrade, and you start to get those core assets. A rebuild is like, dude, tear it down. So Snoog, Smash Except 4 is the only league that I was rebuilding last year, and I had Jalen Hurts. I love Jalen Hurts. So the guy that drafted at 103 took Bryce Young. I wish it would have been CJ Stroud, but he offered me Bryce Young then, and 2 random firsts for Jalen Hurts. Okay, so if you look at that on paper, when you say random, that's really what you want. Is you want to target those teams where you look at them and you're like, 1 or 2 injuries, and this could be an early one. So Snoog, that trade ended up being Jalen Hurts for Bryce Young, the 103, the 105, and I traded Bryce Young for a 25 first. So for Jalen Hurts, I got an early 25 first. It's a lock for first or second, guaranteed the way it looks. The 103, I took Malik Neighbors. The 105, I got Rome Odunze. So I went from Jalen Hurts to now having a future first that's really early and 2 borderline foundational wide receivers, and I took Caleb 1. So now we're talking about that core went from Jalen Hurts and the 10 and my first, which was going to be late, to the 101, Caleb Williams, Malik Neighbors at 3, Rome at 5, and an early 25 first. And that's really how you get that splash going. A lot of people just sit there. For me, another league, I did a splash trade. I gave up, and this sounds bad. I think I put it out there today where people are like, well, Dad, this is a bad trade. And I did this in January, but I gave up Keenan Allen, Jared Goff, Travis Etienne, and Odell Beckham was a throw-in from Michael Pittman and 2 random firsts.
Yeah.
I'm going to flip Pittman, but now I got random firsts. The rest of these guys are all going to depreciate in value except maybe Etienne and Goff. Those firsts are only going to go up. So that splash trade, I know you and I didn't do a rebuild process last year. I know it's different than what a lot of people preach, but for me, it's like I'm not trying to trade Justin Jefferson for Jordan Addison in a bunch of seconds. I'm trying to trade for what I think could be real home runs.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where understanding the talent and the ceiling of a player versus the guys you had, like the Darnell Mooneys, the Elijah Moores, right? Like those guys that were just so hyped up from the dynasty community. And like we all knew those guys weren't that good. Like we knew those weren't superstars. Like Garrett Wilson was drafted 10th overall to the Jets, and people still didn't adjust and say Elijah Moore wasn't that guy. Like these are the things that you can't get caught up in. Sure, you'll hit on your Amon-Ra St. Brown, your Puka Nacua, like those weird mystical guys that are like 5th round picks that randomly pop off and then they end up being good for their career. But that's like 2 guys in the past like multiple years at wide receiver that have been like that. Running backs is different, but wideout, like don't get caught on the Moonies, don't get caught on the Elijah Moores, don't get caught on like these type of guys. Jaden Reed's another one. Rashi Rice is another one. Like these guys are just players that they're not bona fide superstars. They're not guys that could be top 12, top 15 assets.
Yeah,
you're playing with fire. You might as well convert those guys into guys like George Pickens, like these type of guys. Devontae, like I have a startup draft that I found. It was in my first Devy startup with a bunch of guys from Twitter. And I drafted Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Devontae Smith in round 5, 6, 7. And like the guys going in that area was like Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, Darnell Mooney was like an 8th round pick. Like Marquise Brown was going with these guys, and I like just couldn't believe it. I was really drafting like elite wide receivers that were drafted top 12 in the NFL draft, and people were taking like these random like 2nd round draft pick wideouts that had just barely cracked 1,000 yards and had like a top 30 season right there with these type of guys. And I love it because people make dynasty super easy, right, Dad? It's like it doesn't take that much. Like people overthink a lot. All you got to do is just look at the talent, look at the draft capital invested in the player, and be like, okay, yeah, that Devontae Smith guy that won the Heisman, he's probably pretty good, right? So I think that's another big thing is a lot of these guys, especially a lot of the DMs I get, is like, should I trade this guy for that guy? And it's like, should I trade Rashi Rice in a 3rd or like a 2nd for Devontae Smith? This was like during the season, and it stuck with me because that was the day I was like, I am selling every bit of Rashi Rice I can, because you could literally turn him into like these prime players. And he'll never get there. And,
right.
And if he does,
that's what people want. They want that. They need that foundational asset, and that's the thing.
Exactly.
Where people have said, I got this in the Patreon the other day. Hey, should I trade CeeDee Lamb? I know you said he's worth 3 firsts. So someone offered me Worthy, Ladd, and I forget what the other first was. It was someone like, I believe it was actually, hold on a second. I think it was Hollywood Brown, and I'm like, absolutely not. They're not 3 guys that are going to hit. You know what I mean? Like you have a certain percentage chance to hit on some of those guys. You guys are commenting on YouTube. I love it. You got They Call Me Young talking about Arizona, talking about Tet McMillan. You got my man, his name's Hay. Happy belated birthday or Father's Day to the Dynasty Dad. Love it. That was a fantastic day. Ken Bro said he's looking to catch a wave of those Scott Fishbowl hopefuls. Guys, I know it's super early. Guys on the West Coast, it is really early right now. So we are going to do a live stream tonight with my kids to pick that out. So I will make sure I post that on Twitter. Love that you guys are communicating on that. It's just been such a fun process to give away that Scott Fishbowl thing. So I wanted to make sure as many people as possible are watching it. And Snoog and I are savages. We're waking up 7 o'clock California time, 10 o'clock Eastern time to just give you guys this kind of content. So the next part you do, once you make that splash trade, Snoog, and this is something that I have found is just one of the best parts. Everybody's just saying, hey, Scott Fishbowl hopefuls. We're going to make sure we do another live stream later in the day. That way all of you guys can see it as opposed to just us couple that are up right now. So once you do that splash trade, Snook, the other thing is that lets everybody know, oh, snap, Dad is all in on this rebuild now, right? And that's the key with the rebuild process is, and you've been in leagues with this, I know, where you see that one guy and he makes that splash trade, he makes that big trade, and then he says, I'm open for business. I'm starting to sell my vets. And now you become that guy that everybody comes to. And from my end, I have Derrick Henry, and this is one where I traded Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins last year for DK Metcalf. And I was like, all right, Henry and Hopkins are going to do nothing for me. DK, I'm going to be able to flip, which I did. I got Devonta Smith and the 312 for DK Metcalf. So you talked about it before. Trading for a player and then cascading them is something that's huge because you can't always, say I'm going to build around DK Metcalf. But then I traded DK Metcalf for Devonta Smith and the 312. Then I traded Devonta Smith, and I know this one doesn't pan out as well, for Quentin Johnston and what's a mid-25 first. The way I look at it there is Devonta Smith is probably going to be worth a mid-first next year. If Quentin hits, it's huge, and I take risks on guys like that. If he doesn't, it's still going to be in that same area. So once you open yourself up for business, Snoog, that's when you as a contender, you're jumping in, you're like, dude, I got to start grabbing some pieces off this team.
Exactly, yeah, and that's like one thing too, that it's always stay fluid with your process and who you're buying, who you're selling. I love this type of shit. Like, this is like guys that like we can know that are safer assets right now in that range of like that 30 to 40 range is like Terry McLaurin, right? Got a QB upgrade. He's a guy that's consistently like a strong wide receiver too. Amari Cooper, another one of those guys. Like Deontay Johnson, another one going into a clear path of target situation with a young quarterback who loves to. He's literally dealing with juice. Like, that's what Devontae Adams is, or Deontay Johnson is. Like, those are the guys that I want to target and on contending teams that are much cheaper, that will give you like why draft like a Jaden Reed or like a Rashee Rice or a Jordan Addison or those guys that are like 20 spots above those guys when you could just draft these guys, get the same or more. You're definitely going to get more production from like the Deontay Johnsons, Terry McLaurin's, Amari Coopers, and you're going to give up a second versus giving up a first plus.
Well, and that's the big thing we've been talking about with the splash. When we did our smash or pass, people are like, I never thought about, you know what, I should trade for Breece Hall and draft Amon-Ra St. Brown, because Amon-Ra St. Brown is just going to keep going. And some of these guys that I was able to just make those trades. And I'm glad you're talking about it from this aspect, because you're talking about it from the win aspect. I made trades very similar to that. Like before the season started, I traded Tyler Lockett and Deebo Samuel, both of them depreciating assets. Am I right? For Will Levis, who wasn't the starter at the time, and a random first. That random first became 107, right? 107 ended up being a guy that I traded for another 25 first plus. So it ended up being Lockett and Deebo for Will Levis and the 25 first. That trade's not achievable today, but last February, absolutely. So you want to target those guys that are going to be up and comers, those guys that don't have a job, those guys right now, in Superflex. This is the type of trade where I'm making an offer, the same kind of offer. I would offer Lockett and Deebo for Michael Penix in a random first, for Justin Fields in a random first, for Sam Howell in a random 25 first, because guess what? Deebo's worth that 25 first. Whoever that quarterback is going to be worth even more than that if they get the starting job. So you want to take those risks with insulation, because at week 3 when I made this trade, Will Levis wasn't worth squat. You know what I mean? But then you trade for it, and all of a sudden, boom, you're all the way in. So a couple comments here. Love it. We got at MonkeyFF just joined the Patreon. Looking forward to being part of the community. How do we access the Discord? I will send you that in a minute. I always send those as soon as the Discord changes every single day. So glad you could join. Next one, buy and sell you. I like to push chips in on Jefferson, Jamar Chase if affordable, then raise the price. Only works when guys who won't lose value. But when it works, you end up with Marvin Harrison. Yeah, Malik Neighbors, McCarthy in 2:25 seconds. Love that. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Is we're trying to make calculated risks with insulation. You go and you make those moves, and you get yourself into a scenario where you avoid, like, for instance, I had Cole Kmet. You know, you and I don't mind Cole Kmet. He's like your tight end 13, 14. Guy really needed him. He didn't realize that I was going to be the first, so he traded his what would be 201 for Cole Kmet. 201, I got Trey Benson. Who would you rather have in Dynasty right now, Trey Benson or Cole Kmet? You know, and you get yourself into those areas, and you talked a lot about those roster clogging, you know, players, those guys that you're really trying to move off of. Because let's be honest. I mean, at this point, what is Jameson Williams going to do for your Dynasty team?
Exactly.
What is, you know, even in these kind of scenarios, Jacoby Myers, Michael Sutton, Michael Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, Romeo Dobbs. I'm trying to make those guys, and I'm trying to turn them into something else. And that's our next spot, is we talk about roster management. Step 4. Now we're trying to, Snoog, this is the biggest difference maker. I did this on all my teams in 2022 for 23. I had 4 rebuilds. Every single one of them won the championship because I got Bijan, I got Gibbs, I got A-Chain. Next year's class has Gordon, Judkins, Henderson, Junty. It's loaded at running back. So if you can right now take your wide receivers, like you said, Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman's fine. You know, I got no problem with Michael Pittman. I mean, these are the type of wide receivers. DK Metcalf, Jordan Addison, T. Higgins, you know, Zay Flowers, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman. They're solid wide receivers. That's fine. I want them as my wide receiver 3s. I'm trying to take, you know what, I have, let's say, Deebo Samuel and we'll go with Michael Pittman. I want to trade them up, and I want to get to Drake London, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson. I want to make all of my wide receivers absolute studs, and that's what I did in Smash Except One, where I have CeeDee Lamb, I have AJ Brown, I have Puka Nacua. I tried to make that wide receiver room elite. So when I filled in with those running backs, when you draft next year and you get 3 guys out of this running back class, because I think there will be 5 guys drafted in round 1 of Superflex startups, or of Superflex rookie drafts that are running backs. And we haven't seen that for a while. Like, you're about to get absolutely loaded. This is the best year to rebuild because you create that positional void. And that's what our roster management is. A lot of people say it's cheating. I say, you know what? I have Kendra Miller. I have Audric Estime. I have Will Shipley. I have a whole roster full of those kind of guys at my running back position that are going to score me minimal points. Once they start scoring me points, get them off there, get that max points off, and get the 101.
Exactly, yeah, and that's what it comes down to, right? I love that you mentioned, like, the Pittman thing. You're trying to tier up. You can even tier back. Like, that range of wideouts right there, like the Pittmans, the DJ Moores. Like, I was a big DJ Moore fan, but now
they're solid wide receivers, but we don't want them on a rebuild.
They're good players. They're talented, but even from a contending perspective, I'll put this in, like, a different way of what I would do if I have a team, right? And Pittman or DJ Moore is my wide receiver 2 or 3. I'm looking to the Devontae Adams owner, the Stephon Diggs owner, the Mike Evans owner, and I'm getting a 25 first on top, and I'm flipping Michael Pittman. I'm flipping DJ Moore. I'm flipping those guys. And
they're almost like a wide receiver dead zone, right? Like, they're not what you want.
Exactly what they are.
They're not what you want in a rebuild, right?
Pittman's
and they're not what you want on a contending team.
They're not. DJ Moore was last year, but like Pittman's never going to be like a league winner, right? Where you're like, damn, I got Michael Pittman. Let's go. Like, he's a guy that's going to finish top 20 every year, maybe top 15.
But this is the time of year.
I don't see it.
I mean, you could flip DJ Moore and a second for Rome and a third, and Rome's going to win you championships several years down the road if you're rebuilding, or you know, you can get yourself into that area where we try to go up and get Neighbors, or we get Olave, or we get London, and that's the key with it all, is making sure we're getting there. And some other trades that I made there, like, we talk about roster management. The other thing we talk about is step 5. You want to insulate and liquidate. You know, you want to get yourself. I'm trying to, like I said, with Cole Kmet. Kmet could only drop in value, but if I trade him for the 201, the 201 can only go up in value. The 201, like I said, ended up being Benson. In a couple other leagues, I took the 201 and flipped it for a random 25 first. And let's be honest, if you're trading running backs, you want those 25 first. You're going to get yourself situated. The other cool thing is in season. Now everybody knows you're open for shop, right? And I know I can make these kind of moves with you when you're contending, but I went to the guys as soon as someone got injured. I traded a random second and a fill-in running back for Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is worth a late first now or an early second. You know, I traded Matthew Stafford and Keenan Allen for Nick Chubb, a first and a second. So the day Nick Chubb got hurt, I'm like, I want that because it does two things, right? It lowers my points 4, and it gives me an asset that's going to move up. And I don't want to just do it randomly because the way I look at this trade is Keenan and Stafford are both early to mid seconds last year. If I get a first and a second for both of them, that's great. Nick Chubb's free. Now, when Nick Chubb comes back, which we know he will this year, he has a couple good games, I can flip him. You know, I can flip him in that second for a first, or I can flip him for another second. Another trade, the week Mike Williams got hurt real early in the season. Cooper Kupp was out. I traded Tutu Atwell for Mike Williams. And that's a feasible trade in season because people don't look far down the road. When Cooper Kupp came back from injury, I traded, and it's all about timing, right? We were talking about injuries, buying injured players. When they come back, I traded Cooper Kupp for Kendre Miller in a first. But you're doing that all day now. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you're smashing that. But the guy was like, once you get in season, Snoog, people forget about values. They throw value out the window and they're like, I got to win. So I need Cooper Kupp. That guy did not win the league. It backfired on him. You know what I mean? Because that ended up being an early first, or it was a non-playoff first. Yeah. Plus Kendre Miller. And there's a real world scenario where Kendre Miller passed Cooper Kupp in value this year. Then you have that first. So it's all about insulating and getting liquid. And I know you could smell the blood in the water when you have anything on those rosters. You start seeing those rebuilding guys. You're like, oh, that guy's got Gus Edwards. So let's start throwing him something. And what I start to do is if you want Gus Edwards, fine. Gus in a third, you give me a second. You're happy. I'm happy. And everybody just starts to build together more on a rebuild because everybody's like, yo, Dad's selling these pieces. He's going to help me. I'm going to help him. Everybody wins.
Exactly. That's literally, you just nailed it. No, you know what?
Sorry, I get excited when I talk rebuilds. You know, like you're on the contending side. I've been trying to preach the rebuild for years. And like I said, I mean, it's a 95%. And the only teams that didn't make it were ones that they made a trade outside that realm of what we've been talking about. And it set them back because they tried to get themselves into that scenario. And you get into the fun area of the season, Snook, where and you got to do this. I mean, I broke the Smash Accept record in Smash 4 where I made 24 trades this year because I was like, I got to make all these little trades every time something happens. So you remember Darrell Henderson had 2 nice games this year?
Yeah.
I traded Henderson in a fourth for the 308. I don't care. It's like resetting the clock. You know what I mean? And then I ended up getting Audric Estime at 308. So it's free Audric Estime upgrade. You know what I mean? And it's not a sexy pick. Another one is when Kareem Hunt had 2 games of relevance early in the season. I traded Kareem Hunt in a third for Daniel Bellinger in a second. Well, Bellinger's now the starter. You know what I mean? It's all about calculations. It's all about finding those guys. We're going to, over the next couple of months, give you guys that are buy lows, give you guys that are in that rebuild window, guys that are super cheap, you know, but Snoog and I really wanted to hammer home the early part where we're trying to get foundational assets and then in season make these small trades because no one's trading you Justin Jefferson right now. That's just, it shouldn't happen. You should not be able to trade for one of those Garrett Wilsons, Puka Nacua, Marvin Harrison, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Jefferson. Nobody should be trading those right now. And if they can, get yourself foundational. But in season, when one of these guys goes down to injury, you know, for instance, Breece Hall, when he went down 2 years ago, I traded Ramondre Stevenson and I think, what was it? Ramondre Stevenson and T. Higgins for Breece Hall. You know, and it's like at the time, that guy's getting 2 players that play, right? He's getting 2 guys that are going to score. Breece Hall's that asset that you want to buy. So injuries are huge when we talk about in-season construction.
Exactly, yeah. And that's another way to building a super team, right? If you're taking your rebuild and you're kind of taking it nice and slow, just wait. Just keep accumulating assets as we go, as we get closer to the season. Just wait. Once that training camp rolls around and that August time and OTAs are kicked off, like just this past week, like you get injuries. Like you get we saw that Pittman injury. Like we saw that there's a ton of injuries. There's contract holdouts with T. Higgins. That's your time to buy, right? Like now is your time to attack and get discounts on these players just to build out the roster. The success rate of winning a fantasy football league when you own the RB1 overall or wide receiver 1 overall or QB1 overall or tight end 1 overall is huge. Like if you own any of those, even if you own 2, I've had teams where I've owned like Kelsey and CMC and they finished first at the position I won. Like I've had teams where I had like back when I kind of was getting into it when Kamara finished RB1 overall that year, he had that crazy year. I had him in 7 out of 7 leagues. I won all 7 leagues. I did not lose a single league. I won all 7 of my leagues because he was the best player that year in fantasy. And when he got me to the championship, he had 6 touchdowns. So that's like what you want to chase. You want to hit on those guys that have that RB1 overall upside, that wide receiver 1 overall upside. And that's honestly the way, because if you have at least 1 or 2 of those guys, you can get away with having like your Pittmans and just your really consistent guys that can give you top 15 to 20 weeks, week after week. And you have that consistency, and then you have the upside of CMC, or you have the upside of Kelsey, or you have the upside of Mahomes on that roster as well to kind of push you over the top and be a true contender. Because those players will carry you. Like, they will give you 40-point weeks, whether they're like making up for 2 guys or 3 guys. So.
And this is something that, honestly, if you guys are interested in the rebuild, we have a rebuild tier in our Patreon. There are guys that have done that and draft assistants, and they've just been like blown away because the amount of trades that you can make if you start thinking outside the box, the amount of trades you can make when you start to just try to cash in on everybody trying to win. I have multiple guys in the Patreon who now have 6, 7, 8. One guy even has 11, 25 firsts because everybody in his league was thinking in a way inside the box. We're trying to think outside the box. And, like I said, this roster started out as a fringe playoff team with Jalen Stafford, Henry Hunt, Kupp, Debo, Nuke, Keenan, Boyd, zero firsts, 0 seconds, 0 thirds. I traded them all, right? Because I don't care about picks when I'm going all in. But when I'm trying to rebuild, all I care about picks. And now in the middle of the season, and this is what people start to really get worried about. So my starting lineup was Will Levis. It was gross. It was Noah Brown, Jawan Jennings, Darnell Mooney, Rashad, like Rondale Moore, Kadarius Toney, Chig Okonkwo, Marvin Mims. It was gross. I didn't win a single game. But does that matter? No, I'm trying to get the 101. Now the roster snoog, and this is the key to it all. It's Caleb, McCarthy, Levis, and Cousins. I got 4 quarterbacks. My running backs, they still suck. It's Kendre Miller, Audric Estime, and a whole barrel full of junk. You know what I mean? And that's fine, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to 2025 and be dominant. The rest of my wide receivers are Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, Lad McConkey, Jalen Polk, Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown I got for nothing. Like, I got him for peanuts because it was like no one wanted him last year. And then Ben Sinnott at tight end. So it's still not sexy. Here's the part that's sexy. I have, right now, 5 25 firsts. 2 of them are a lock for 101 and 102 because one's mine, the other one's really bad. So that's going to give me 1 and 2. I have, let me check real quick. I have 2 26 firsts. I have my 25 second. It's in an area where I'm ready to just push the chips in, but it's not a playoff team right now. I know that. So if I can be patient and I can sit there, next year you look at this team, Snoog, and you say, all right, here we go. We got Caleb Williams, and I'm going to upgrade from J.J. McCarthy. Let's just be honest. Levis, Cousins, and McCarthy, I'm going to turn one of those guys somewhere at some point to Kyler Murray, to Dak Prescott, to Jaden Daniels. Then my running backs, it's not going to be Kendre Miller and Audric Estime. It's going to be Ollie Gordon and Quinshon Judkins. Then my wide receivers are going to be Neighbors and Rome. They're already there. But I'm going to flip Hollywood. Lad's going to end up being my wide receiver 4 or 5 when this is all said and done. Burden's going to be available in there. I'm going to start loading in with these other wide receivers. And then you get yourself into a scenario like I have in like Smash Except 3. And I send that one out there all the time. But people are like, this team isn't real. And this is what you do when you're done with it all. I mean, this is my Smash 3 team, one I've rebuilt properly. Yeah. Richardson and Love are my quarterbacks with Goff and Bryce Young on the bench. Don't need them. Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley are my running backs. My wide receivers are Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, Malik Neighbors. And then I have Evan Ingram at tight end. So I did make a mistake and traded McBride during the process, but you're going to win some. You're going to lose some. But when you're an active trader, when you're making things work with a purpose, right? Don't just trade to trade. Trade with a purpose. If you're trying to be all in, like I know you are most of the time, I'm trading with the purpose to go all in. Not just saying, you know what? Michael Pittman's worth more than Devontae Adams in a second. Yeah, he is. But not for you to win, and if I'm looking on the other end, yeah, I mean, Michael Pittman's probably worth more than, we'll say Keon Coleman and Xavier Worthy. But if I'm not trying to win, if I get both of those guys, I got 2 shots to pass where he is. And everything's about trading with a purpose.
Exactly. That's perfect right there. It's all about the value and how you can insulate and keep getting the same production, but add a draft capital. Like, you could go from Pittman to Adams plus, Adams to Amari Cooper plus, and then you could probably go from like Amari to like DeAndre Hopkins plus. And like, that's like, you're getting at least a first plus on top of all of that. And if you can get a top 20, like there's a world where Amari outscores a Michael Pittman, or there's definitely a world where Adams does. I guarantee you Adams does. So that's just Mike Evans will. Like Diggs could. Like these are the things that you got to think about. And I have a team right here that I have Devontae Adams and Mike Evans in my wide receiver core. And then I have AJ Brown, Chris Olave, and DJ Moore as my anchors. So that's like a good strategy for me that I like to roll off. And it's okay to not have two absolutely superstar elite quarterbacks. Like here I have Stroud, Goff, and Stafford. Like that's like the perfect three guys to have in 6-point passing. You know they're going to put up 4,000 yards. They'll get close to 30, 25 plus touchdowns. You're going to get top 12 years out of all three of those guys. Like those are what you want to chase. Like people get too caught up in I need to own all these elite rushing quarterbacks or my quarterbacks won't produce. Like no, the rushing just helps. But you have to understand there's risk with injuries. There's a lot less passing volume coming from that. There's a lot less passing touchdowns coming from that. Like Anthony Richardson, he's not going to go out there and throw for 4,000 yards and 30 plus touchdowns. He'll probably never do that. Like he'll probably be like a 3,000 guy that goes for like a couple hundred rushing yards and like double-digit rushing touchdowns. So in 4-point passing, you want that. Like that's what you're chasing, that type of player. In 6-point passing, it's still good, but you can lean closer to those pocket passers and those elite offenses that can put up those big years.
Yeah, I love how we're talking about this because you're talking about cascading from studs to stay, a team that's win now, and it's the ones that I was talking about where I traded Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins for Metcalf plus, and then traded Metcalf for Devonta plus, and then traded Devonta for Quentin Johnston plus. Ended up being for the equivalent of what would be 3 firsts. You're not getting 3 firsts for DeAndre and Henry, but if you start compounding those, you start to build them up because everybody wants what's right in front of their face. Everybody in season will trade the 25 first a lot more likely than what they are right now. And that's where throughout the season you guys are going to want to be plugged into what we're talking about who we're buying in those situations. First of the month, I always tell you who I'm buying as contending builds and rebuilding builds, and I know Snoog's involved with those things too. So we're just trying to give you the right assets. That's what it's all about in Dynasty, is having the right assets at the right time. Like having those guys last year when they're injured, that's not the right time for you. But that's the right time for a rebuilder to have them on the team. When a guy hasn't quite popped off yet, like a Dontavian Wicks, if you're rebuilding, he's a great guy to draft because you can get him in the same, value range as DeAndre Hopkins or less. You can get him in that same value range. I saw him the other day go behind Curtis Samuel because someone wants to win. And it's like Wicks is going to go up in value. That's why everything's strategic. So if you guys want to play chess instead of checkers, make sure you guys check us out in the Patreon. Make sure you guys are tuned in to the YouTube. Brock Dynasty's putting out fire YouTube threads. If you guys have not seen our last one, Smash or Pass, it is the coolest graphics. You guys got to sub for that. We're almost to our goal of 1,000 by July, and we're almost there already. So, or actually it was 900 by July, and we're already so we're over that. We're trying to get to 1,000 now. So, we love all that support. Check us out, Patreon.com/Smash Accept. Check out the YouTube page. We're about to jump on there and do another Smash or Pass. So thanks again for tuning in, and enjoy the process. I know rebuild's my thing. I get excited.